consider where we were a year ago, and I'm curious to see how September ends up playing out, where we just finished September, but October as well into the fall, because that's when we really saw another huge rise in cases last year. So it'll be interesting to see if we see a similar trend this year.
Hey gang, it's Tuesday, October 5th. Zach, Oscar, and listeners, welcome to the Behind the Numbers Daily and eMarketer podcast made possible by Newstar. I'm Marcus. Today I'm joined by two folks. Let's meet them. First of all, we have Zach Goldner. He is one of our associate forecasting analysts.
Hey, Marcus.
Hey, chap. Thanks for hanging out. And we also have joining us one of our directors of forecasting. It's Oscar Orozco.
Hey, Marcus. Thanks for having me.
Hey, buddy. So, gents, today's fact: tornadoes are invisible. You'll be happy to learn. According to the National Severe Storms Lab, a tornado is a narrow, violently rotating column of air that extends from the base of a thunderstorm to the ground. Because wind is invisible, it is hard to see a tornado unless it forms a condensation funnel made up of water droplets, dust, and debris. So you don't see a tornado, you just see what it picks up. As if they weren't scary enough, now I learn they can be invisible.
I mean, I'll hear it coming, right? I mean, I hope.
Hopefully.
Pop out of nowhere. Okay.
You'll hear it. You might see a cow flying.
That's how you know. If a cow has taken flight, something's up. Today's real topic: where Americans are at with travel. So, gents, at the start of September, 47% of Americans were comfortable traveling or going on vacation, just under half, according to a civic science survey. Slightly more than were happy to go to the cinema or a public event, but way less than were happy to go shopping, working among colleagues, or eating out. Back on June 6th, 65%, the start of June, 65% of folks were happy to travel, but then the Delta variant happened, bringing that figure down to that 47% it was at the start of September. We're talking today about where Americans are at with travel. We've seen in August the volume of travelers was 80% of pre-pandemic 2019 levels. That's better than the 60% of pre-pandemic levels it was at in April. So from 60 in April up to 80 in August, according to the TSA. Gents, initial thoughts on where Americans are at with travel today?
I think, we've been seeing domestically, it's ramped up so quickly. It feels, as I've traveled recently a few times, it feels like things are almost back to normal. Of course, considering that there are still restrictions and rules and regulations to follow. But you mentioned a few of the things. I mean, the Delta variant is something that is definitely keeping some people away. But one thing to keep in mind, travel is such a large word, but there's so many subsectors to that, right? It's the business travel, which we know is still hurting, and like cruises, which I think we might talk about later, right? So I think domestically, it's doing well. International is another example, kind of like the business travel, which is still not nearly close to what it was pre-pandemic 2019. Yep. So when thinking of it that way, there's still a lot of sort of room there for us to get back to what travel really felt and looked like in 2019.
Touching on international and domestic, so internationally, less than a third of global travelers feel safe crossing international borders, according to Braze, a customer engagement platform. Domestically, Oscar, you're spot on. Once you start to break the travel down a bit, you'd start to see how significant domestic travel is, breaking out air travel, car rental, and hotel vacation rental. There were some numbers from Comscore. For car rental, it's nowhere near pre-pandemic levels. It's about 50%, but that's more sharing cars. People aren't driving a lot. In terms of air travel, it was getting close to, this is around July, August time, getting close to around 80%. So car rental 50, air travel 80%. But in May 2021, hotel and vacation rental reached pre-pandemic levels, in my opinion, suggesting a return to the kind of the great American local road trip. It did then fall in June, so it just got up to pre-pandemic levels in terms of hotel and vacation rental in May, and then dropped a bit in June because of the Delta variant. But Zach, to Oscar's point, you do have to break things down to really understand where Americans are at with travel.
Yeah, so when you talk about different precautions have been taken place or measures that have been taken place for Americans to feel like they can safely travel again. You look at mask mandates that are in all federal locations like an airport or airplane, which that's making more travelers feel comfortable. And then also when you look at international travel too, as much as Americans are more reluctant on going internationally because no one wants to get stuck in an international country without a home or a house to be at.
Right. If the regulations change, absolutely.
Yeah. But if you're going to Canada or to Europe, you need to be able to have proof of vaccination. So there are other measures that are coming about that are making Americans feel safer to be able to fly. But if you think about it, the U.S. is currently the 43rd most vaccinated country in the world. So a lot of other places to go are technically safer, or there's a higher vaccinated population that will make Americans more comfortable to fly.
Yeah.
The vaccination thing is something that isn't talked about enough, but it's keeping people away from many locations. So of course it's going to drive just this domestic, more regionalized travel. And I think that's absolutely what we're seeing. With the EU, though, I'm really interested to see, and it seems to be working well, but they've created this block-wide digital certification system that's really leading to higher growth among the continental countries there. So that's helping in Europe specifically. But of course, travel internationally is so difficult. On the US side, it's still, we're not going to see that for a while, people traveling to Europe or Asia or other places.
On the vaccine rate, it's a great point. 56% of Americans vaccinated to date, fully vaccinated. 64% have had at least one dose, as according to the New York Times latest figures, I believe from a few days ago. And with the vaccines comes COVID cases. And it seems as though travel greatly tied to COVID cases. It seems obvious, but some of the things just aren't as tied to COVID cases as travel. Cases skyrocketed in July. Travel stalled, but people were still going out to grocery stores. So even though cases went up, people said, I'll still go to the grocery store. I feel comfortable doing that. I'll go meet friends for dinner and drinks. I feel comfortable doing that, but not for travel. That's a bridge too far, it seems, for a lot of folks. However, it's a good sign for the travel industry and everyone that cases have come down somewhat. There are 150,000 cases. It was a 7-day average at the beginning of September. They've come down to about 110, a 7-day average today. And it's interesting, guys, because it seems as though people, even though they're hesitant, some of them had booked. Southwest Airlines recently said the variant was slowing bookings and had triggered an increase in cancellations. So that suggests that people weren't delaying booking. They pulled the trigger, but now they were having to pull out.
Absolutely. And I think with airlines, United Airlines, JetBlue, American, Delta, all of them have lowered their third quarter expectations. Given the variant, given all of these situations. Consider where we were a year ago, and I'm curious to see how September ends up playing out, where we just finished September, but October as well into the fall, because that's when we really saw another huge rise in cases last year. So it'll be interesting to see if we see a similar trend this year. I still expect a holiday boost, but a lot of it will depend how the year ends on the fall. And so we should keep an eye on that.
It's going to be hard to see the holiday boost as early as we'd like to, it seems. According to a Google and Ipsos survey, just 30 to 40% of people will make travel plans for the holidays a month or more in advance. So less than half of folks, quite a lot less, will make travel plans as early as they might do. So it's going to take us a while because people just don't know what's happening, what to expect, how much things might change. To that point, gents, it seems as though customer expectations have changed. Sarah Spivey, a CMO of customer engagement platform Braze, wrote an Adweek piece recently saying that today travelers expect real-time information on health and safety protocols, where they're headed, and news about any restrictions, and also timely updates on what is open and accessible. And so, I don't know, I haven't seen any kind of stellar examples of travel companies really making or reassuring their customers about the trip they're about to embark on. I'm not sure how you guys feel about that and how the customers changed in this new world, or the travelers changed in this new world.
Just in my recent trip, to give you an example, my flight, I got a message 8 hours before departure telling me that it was delayed 10 hours. 10 hours, which is nothing I'd ever seen or dealt with before. I was 20 minutes away from sleeping and I would have missed that message. So things like that are going to just, keep people away and people will hold off until the new year for things to improve. As you mentioned, messaging from the travel companies as well. All of this is not quite at pre-pandemic levels, which just creates that uncertainty and keeps people away.
I think the onus right now should be on these travel companies. They need to be the ones that are practicing messaging and letting their customers know what is going on in the place that they're traveling to, because mandates are changing very quickly. Different cities have vaccine mandates to indoor places. I've seen on at least Expedia that some flights that I might need to take require a negative COVID test. So it's a bunch of different factors that the airlines need to be able to take the initiative to let their customers know what to expect. And they also have to provide the ability for cancellations and more flexibility for the customers to decide when they want to take a trip and to be able to be given that opportunity to be able to back away in case they don't feel comfortable.
Yeah, letting them know what to expect is really important. I mean, really quickly on that point, Zach, about letting people back away. Earlier this year, a Google commissioned pandemic travel poll by Ipsos found nearly 6 out of 10 folks sought to change bookings without penalties. So it is becoming somewhat of an expectation, whether that's being able to change with lower fees or no fees at all. Oscar, you touched on the idea of the business traveler, and that hasn't recovered as much as the leisure traveler, and also thinking about how much of this is travelers having to travel, needing to travel, wanting to travel. Jason Notti of Adweek was talking about the essential traveler. In a contrast to serving business or leisure guests, he writes, the essential traveler has specific needs that hotel chains like Wyndham are addressing. And Wyndham CMO, who he spoke to, Lisa Chachio, she says that the majority of business travelers at its over 6,000 US locations are actually construction workers, utility workers, truckers, and other infrastructure and logistics workers. She was saying shutdowns don't apply to these folks, so guests specifically wanted to know about mask policies, social distancing, cleaning amenities, and restaurant availability well before arrival. And she talked about this idea of being able to book with confidence. Zach, you'd mentioned, I think when we talked about travel last time, that a lot of the travel we're seeing is people going to see people they've missed, friends, family.
And I loved that quote about, historically brands have seen it as leisure and business travel, but this essential traveler category, which is new. And I think, again, from the brand's perspective, that's exactly how they need to start categorizing those travelers. And they need to start messaging that and by making more people fall into that category. That comes from them as well, by reminding them, like, you need to go on this trip, or you need to go to this location to visit a family member, or if it's for, leisure purposes, but making more people fall into that category. I think that's how airlines should think of it, hotel chains, cruise lines, everyone. And that's really the way to have growth increase into the winter and into spring as well in 2022. So I thought that was a really great quote.
And speaking of business travel and the article that you referenced before, companies are needing to use data to be able to identify what patterns they're seeing with COVID hesitancy. There's this one example where Wyndham, they launched their own mobile app, so guests would be able to check in, check out without any human contact. So that helps out with employee shortages as well, where someone doesn't need to necessarily contact the desk and they don't have to worry about talking to a natural human.
Yeah, the essential traveler just has different needs. Final point from me was something that John Ferguson, lead analyst at Comscore, had noted. Additionally, he said seasonality seems to have resurfaced, which is interesting during this recovery, as seen in the dips in travel around the 4th of July. So after the 4th, travel dips a bit. He suggests that perhaps this is a sign that travelers are behaving in ways similar to pre-COVID years, despite lower overall travelers on planes.
And I think that's a great sign, Marcus, just saying that once we see these trends returning to normal, I think that's a sign that there is light at the end of the tunnel.
Absolutely. Gents, that's all we've got time for the lead story. It's time now for the halftime report, where we summarize the key takeaways in a handful of seconds. Oscar, I'll start with you. Your key takeaway from the first half?
Yeah, circling back to one of the things I said at the beginning is, and I think what we should keep an eye out for is with the airlines, many have said that they expect by the summer of 2022 for long-haul international travel to pick up. Again, back to that international story. We heard this last year with the same expectation for 2021, which didn't quite happen. But I think that's going to be a huge indicator of things really returning back to normal in the travel industry.
Zach, how about you?
Companies need to innovate. There's less demand right now, especially from a business standpoint, where companies aren't sending as many of their employees on business trips. And that's partially due to hesitancy from the employees. And also, travel isn't great for the environment as well. So these airlines are going to need to be able to reimagine their plans to make it more accessible to less business savvy individuals and more to those that are looking to take leisure time.
Zach, to your point about sustainability and flying not being great, traveling not being great for the planet, there was that Google commissioned pandemic travel poll by Ipsos. I noted about 6 out of 10 folks seeking to change their bookings without penalties. They also noted that even more folks, I think it was 70 to 80% of folks, were concerned about travel and about sustainability when traveling and wanted more sustainable travel options. That's all we've got time for the lead story. It's time now for In Other News, but first a quick word from our sponsor, Newstar. Are you prepared for marketing's next chapter? You won't want to miss Brave New Worlds 2021, the virtual marketing and analytics event of the year on November 9th and 10th. Join Brave New Worlds to learn how you can adapt to the forces redefining advertising. It's free, and you'll hear from today's top minds in marketing, data, and analytics, including executives from Facebook, General Motors, Capgemini, Publicis, and more. Go to bravenewworlds.newstar to register today. Folks, we are back today in other news. NFL ratings, alternative telecasts, and sports betting on smartphones. Story 1. The first week of the NFL season came with a significant ratings hike versus last year, per Bloomberg, writes Insider Intelligence analyst Daniel Konstantinovich. CBS's viewership was up 21% from last year, NBC's was up 11%. Daniel notes that flagging NFL viewership and low Super Bowl ratings raise concerns that broadcast sports may be on a decline. There have been some glimmers of hope, though. CBS said its Browns-Chiefs matchup was its most watched opening weekend game since 2015, in 6 years. Broadcasters aren't just hoping ratings snap back to normal on their own, though. They have been experimenting. The former quarterback Manning brothers, Eli and Peyton, provide commentary on an alternative telecast on ESPN that, as Derek Robertson of The Atlantic explains, has the hangout feel of a Twitch stream as the Mannings break down the game as talking heads from their couches. Nearly 15 million folks watched the standard telecast of the Ravens-Raiders game in week 1 of the NFL season. Just 5% of that audience chose the alternative Manning Brothers telecast. That audience has since grown. Oscar, I'll start with you. Your thoughts on the NFL ratings so far this year? This was week 1 data, but also this alternative telecast concept.
Yeah, I mean, to start off, I think there's been some great games so far. That always helps, right? That's a real basic way to keep people engaged. But I think it comes back to something I remember we talked about at some point last year, which was the empty stadiums and how that did not help, even for viewers watching from their sofas. And I think that's been one of the reasons. I think the empty stadiums just made for a kind of an awful viewing experience. And the fact that they're raucous and loud atmospheres now is really adding to the experience for the viewers. And so that's one thing. We talked about seasonality as well, and the fact that if you recall the league's schedule, I mean, all sports leagues in the US were kind of off schedule by a few months and things like that. I think that didn't help with last season, and the fact that everything is kind of back on schedule as it normally is, that routine that viewers have come to expect is really helping on the ratings front as well. I also, you asked about the sort of alternative, broadcasts. I would say it's not really my cup of tea, but this stuff works. I think the Nickelodeon, Viacom sort of streaming, and it's even on traditional TV, is helping with children. We know the NFL has an issue, a demographics issue, where younger consumers are not really watching as much as we've seen in decades past. So it's interesting. I think it's adding to kind of that mix and leading to higher engagement. Again, not really my cup of tea. I don't think it's a lot of people's favorite thing. They're likely sticking to the traditional broadcast, but it's innovative, and I think it helps with ratings.
On the age thing, yeah. So according to a recent report by Sportico, the median viewer age for NBC's Sunday Night Football was just over 53 years old. So it is an older demographic that's watching sports. Oscar, to your point, CBS and Nickelodeon saying they're again going to produce a slime-filled, kid-friendly telecast of an NFL playoff game. There have been alternative telecasts as well. Kevin Draper of the New York Times noting that such telecasts go back at least to 2004 when ESPN showed a behind-the-scenes feed of a college football game, and in 1980 points out that NBC tried an announcerless broadcast, which sounds awful, with just the natural sights and sounds of the game. However, they do suggest that a lot of this experimentation is just where networks can take pieces that work and add them to existing shows, as opposed to hoping that these will become their own shows. Now I've said that, though, I guess you could watch football on mute, but I need the option of commentary. I need to at least know there's voices there if I need them. Zach, 100%. Your thoughts?
Yeah, so I was going to make a counter argument to Oscar. I enjoy those alternate telecasts. I don't always watch them, but it's not something that NFL needs to do. As much negative press as the league does get with declining viewing over the last couple of years, they are doing really well from a viewership standpoint in comparison to the NBA, MLB, and other leagues as well. They have a massive audience. They have nearly $3 billion in ad revenue. But I think the NFL really could use some more memeable content. You look at what other sports have been doing, like boxing, and them bringing in Snoop Dogg for a Triller feature. Things like that are able to have tidbits that are brought into social media, like Eli Manning in that last telecast flipping off the bird. That got numerous call-outs on social media. Things that these telecasters that they're being brought on, they relate to the audience. I grew up watching the Manning brothers. It's someone who I'd enjoy listening, talk to, more so than the actual game at times. So I think the NFL needs to keep experimenting. As long as they take my Bears away from prime time, I think they're doing the right thing. They do not deserve that attention. I'll say that.
No, they don't. In some ways, the articles were noting, the New York Times article noting that the Manning telecast audience is a great success in some ways, since whatever is on ESPN2 during Monday Night Football usually draws only hundreds of thousands of viewers anyway. So if you compare it to the regular telecast, yes, it's not doing so great. If you compare it to what would normally be there, there's a pretty sizable audience. And it's, give it time, see where it can go. Story 2. Sports betting, once largely outlawed outside of Nevada, is now, as The Economist explains, an increasingly regulated $500 billion business, $500 billion, where increasingly more bets are placed on mobile phones. Today, half of the US states have liberalized offering wagers on sports. By 2025, analysts predict that bookmakers serving American sports fans could pocket $10 to $15 billion a year in gross gaming revenue, the money they earn after paying out successful wagers, notes The Economist. As Daniel Konstantinovich notes, Facebook may be dipping its toes into gambling with new fantasy games that will let users predict, not bet, on the outcome of shows and sports events per Marketing Dive. The first game, Pick and Play Sports, is now available. Gents, what do you make of where sports betting is today?
Yeah, so Brian Rolop, he's the chief media and business officer for the NFL, mentioned that they have evidence that sports betting keeps people tuned into games longer, increases the number of games they watch, especially games that people might not want to watch. Sorry, Zach, like your Bears sometimes. Games later into the seasons that might not have playoff implications. And that makes a ton of sense to me. So it definitely goes hand in hand with engagement. We've seen it, and we've chatted about fantasy as well, which, is sort of like betting. And we've seen how a lot of these teams have now offer in-stadium betting services and things like this. So absolutely, it's something the NFL should lean into more and more, and all leagues across the country.
Zach, don't let him talk about your Bears like that. Oscar's a 49ers fan. They haven't won since 95, so don't allow that.
Yeah, well, the Bears haven't won since I've been alive, so it's fine.
Zach, your thoughts?
Yeah, I think that the sports betting landscape has a massive pie to it. This year, they're expecting $2.1 billion in sport betting revenues in the U.S., and that to nearly go up to $10 billion by 2028. So there's a lot of money in there, and companies are going to do whatever they can to get a little piece of that pie. So they're putting up hundreds of dollars of incentives to get each user on, and they're hoping that each of those users will spend a few $1,000s each to be able to make up for that upfront incentive. Flutter, which is one of the bigger sports gambling companies, they're spending $291 to acquire each American customer. So companies are betting a lot on the future growth of sports betting, and you can see massive companies like ESPN really showing that off with their new programming and talking about sports betting in most of their daily TV shows.
Yeah, it does get people to care more. If my team's not doing great, I'm a Rams fan, so that's typically the case. I still tune in. I still care if I'm playing something like fantasy football. So yeah, it can absolutely help with engagement. That's what we've got time for this episode. Thank you so much to my guests. Thank you, Oscar.
Thanks for having me, Marcus.
Of course. Thank you, Zach.
Great talking.
Yes, sir. Thank you to Victoria. She edits the show. Thank you to everyone listening in. In case you missed it, check out our webinars on demand, especially the tech talk about audio intelligence, how to boost travel confidence with sponsor messages, presented by Veritonic. Click on the registration link below in the show notes if you want some of that action. We'll see you guys tomorrow, hopefully for the Behind the Numbers Daily, an eMarketer podcast made possible by Newstar.